Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as AISA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. Welcome back, everyone, to Cyber Voices. It's me, David Willett, and I am joined today by a very special guest. I'm very pleased to have him here in the virtual studio. I've got William O, Senior Vice President, Head of Asia Pacific at BlueVoyant. Now, Will has over 30 years of experience in foreign affairs, including ex-CIA, intelligence, national security, and in the commercial and legal sectors with a focus on Asia. He's a recognised subject matter expert on the Asia-Pacific region with demonstrated successes in management positions in Asia, Oceania, and the Middle East, and wide-ranging experience working with foreign partners and in multilateral forums. And he's just told me this is his first ever podcast interview, so that makes this extra special. Will, welcome to the show.
Oh, David, thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, it's an honor to be the first on your podcast as well, and look forward to a great conversation.
That's quite the career you've had, Will. What's led you from ex-intelligence through to working to an organization like BlueVoyant?
People say that I can't keep a job down, but the last few years of my career in the CIA, I realized that cybersecurity was becoming a very important topic. In fact, it's become one of the most important topics because of all the threats going on right now. I think the next war will be started with a massive cyber attack. It's actually what happened in Ukraine weeks before the Russian attack. There were massive cyber attacks hitting Ukraine's infrastructure, government, commercial entities as well in preparation for the attack. That was caught and at the time, they kind of thought it was just cyber attacks and, indications, whatever intelligence they had that Russia was going to attack, that was one of the indicators. So that's going on all around the world right now. And even during peace times, a lot of adversaries are using cyber attacks because it's the easy way to do it, right? Just sit back in your home country and reach out from afar and take down critical infrastructure, take down governments or slow down governments. And I started to realize that in the last few years of my career in the CIA. And when I was about to retire, I decided cybersecurity is one where previously I worked with a lot of governments in Asia. I worked with Australia. I worked with New Zealand, all the allies across Asia. And I was telling them or urging them to increase their cybersecurity. The one thing I couldn't do is actually provide them with a solution.
It sounds like there's almost a bit more of a meaningful impact or a material impact that you're able to have now that you've moved into private enterprise, I guess, because you mentioned there the cyber warfare, the stuff that's happening underneath all of the physical warfare that we see on the news every day. But the underlying cyber attacks that happen underneath that, which will often start one of these conflicts, is probably something that doesn't get reported on very often, would you say?
Yeah, I think the general public is not really tracking on the cyber side of things. I think, people like you, CISOs, and people in the cybersecurity industry, and especially within governments, are tracking. You probably heard of the recent kind of typhoon attacks or typhoon cyber incidents going on right now. Those are kind of more persistent threats. So there's a lot more going on than, your normal person who reads the news is aware of. But if you actually start digging into some of the cybersecurity forums and news and all that, you will see a lot of that going on.
Talking about going from government into private enterprise, I mean, so many of the targets now, whatever kind of warfare is being waged, are often in privatized industry who are really sort of fending for themselves. I've got some stats here from your organization that say that 81% of companies say they've suffered a breach via a supplier. Or 30% of breaches also now involve, third parties, which has doubled over previous years and continues to grow each year. Now, I'm as I said before we started recording, I'm a CISO. I know what third party risk is. Help listeners who may not be that clued into what these stats mean.
To start off with is the definition of what a third party is, right? If you're the company, you have vendors. Some are connected to your system, some are providing you services, some hold your information, sensitive information, customer information. We can talk about Qantas as well. That was a third party attack where a third party vendor was holding a lot of customer information for Qantas. And it's not just Qantas. I mean, most recently in Singapore, DBS, Bank of China, also got hit through third-party attacks where a third-party vendor was holding your information. So anywhere, any vendor or any outside party that's either connected to you can pose a risk to you is holding your information. We consider that third party. And what we're seeing right now is that as entities have woken up to cybersecurity, so they're doing a really good job. A lot of entities are doing a good job protecting themselves. But what they aren't really aware of is that now the third party risk, right? Where the third party being smaller companies a lot of times, which don't have robust cybersecurity or don't spend a lot on cybersecurity, they're the bigger risk right now because the attackers or the cyber actors, what they're doing is they're scanning the entire internet looking for vulnerabilities in companies. They're attacking those so they can swim upstream into the main entity or steal customer information that the third party may hold on behalf of the entity. So we're really making a big push into talking to companies, governments, critical infrastructure about third party and how they can better protect themselves by protecting their third parties.
We've seen such a sharp rise in supply chain attacks globally. Would you say that the driving force behind this acceleration is just how dependent organizations have become on third or even fourth parties? And what's sort of the weakness in the way that people are managing that risk that is leading to so much third-party compromise?
I think as the entire globe, and especially in the commercial realm, they digitize more and more services are being provided through this connection, especially with the ease of, transferring data from the main entity to your vendors and all that. I think that's becoming a bigger risk right now. There's more connections, there's more data being transferred back and forth. So that's creating a big vulnerability now. Let's take a global bank, for instance. Let's say JP Morgan, right? They spend millions and millions of dollars on cybersecurity. But the third-party vendor who may be providing accounting services, payroll services, they may not be spending as much. They're probably not, right? They don't have the robust cybersecurity section or the spending that JP Morgan may have. So the cyber actors find an easier time going to those third parties and try to swim upstream again, trying to get into the third parties and trying to get at either client information or swimming up to the main entity as well. And I think it's cyber actors too. Cyber actors are now getting smarter and smarter where they realize that, hey, I can't get into a JP Morgan. I can't get into the Department of Defense. So why don't I look at the third party, which is an easier route? So what they're doing is they're using things like AI tools that scan the entire world and look for 0 days, look for vulnerabilities, open ports. And they can do that with AI tools fairly quickly, right? Overnight, they can get a list of, hundreds of companies that may have a specific vulnerability that they're looking for and say, hey, if I can use this company, this vulnerability, attack this company, and then get at information for another entity. So that's what they're doing. They're getting smarter and smarter. And it's always kind of a game of cat and mouse where, we're trying to catch up to the cyber actors. And I think we're doing a good job, but third-party risk is becoming one area where we see and we would recommend that entities pay more attention to.
Pivoting, I guess, to the elephant in the room in Australia right now is, you mentioned it earlier on, is there was a recent breach of the national airline, which really brought this issue front and center for many Australians. The Qantas breach is something that could happen to anyone. What was it that's such an important learning for everyone else?
Yeah, the surprising thing is that, in a third-party vendor which had so much of Qantas information may not have had the robust cybersecurity that I don't know who this third party is right now. From the news articles, I couldn't find the name or anything, but some company that large didn't have the effective cybersecurity to prevent the breach or at least detect it. And supposedly, I think from the news articles I read that Qantas was the one that actually found the incident, not the third party itself. So a company providing such large services, and I'm sure Qantas is not the only one that they provided third-party services for, that they could have been breached and not actually catch the incident at the time of breach. That was the surprising part. And it should be kind of a wake-up call or at least a lesson to Australian companies all around Asia that this could happen to almost any company because Qantas is a fairly large and sophisticated company and you have other such entities out there. So that's not surprising, but it's something that I think even large companies who believe that they have robust cybersecurity should start thinking about looking more into their third parties and see how they can, secure their information by securing their third parties as well.
Really important point there is that the attack vector is nothing that is exclusive to Qantas. Many Australian companies, in fact, companies all over the world, outsource critical services like customer support to offshore organizations. And it seems that this practice, based on what you're saying and my own observation of what's going on, is really amplifying this risk. I'm interested to get your thoughts in how organizations managing or what they could be doing better in terms of managing their third-party risk. And I guess a little anecdote from my side, it's nothing that's new to me, as I've already mentioned. I feel like we've been hammered on having to manage our third parties for quite a while. But dare I say that a lot of what goes on is a little bit theatrical when it comes to managing third-party risk. There's the questionnaire that needs to be completed. And the questionnaire is usually just like, okay, do you have a SOC 2? Can we see the report? Have you done a pen test in the last year? Any outstanding findings? Like, what should people actually be doing to get a better grip and control around their third-party risk as opposed to just tossing questionnaires back and forth and doing a 5x5 risk rating?
Well, I think the first part is to have an understanding of what your critical vendors are, right? At the start of any engagement with BlueVoyant, we work with the client and, look at who pose the biggest risk to the company from a cybersecurity standpoint, from a criticality standpoint, from a connection standpoint. So we have criteria that we use to help the customers with selecting who the really critical third parties are, right? So we have different levels of monitoring for third party. The one thing I like to highlight, when we do the questionnaires, we have the ability to, through our monitoring, to verify some of that questionnaire information. So, if a company says that they have some kind of a regular patching schedule and we can tell from our scanning that, hey, this company said that they have a 60, 90-day kind of patch schedule, but we're seeing that they're kind of past due on that. So there's ways of verifying that information. So I think the first part is, again, finding out who your critical vendors are, right? Who can actually affect you, take you down, has customer information, impacts your business, and then applying the right kind of third-party monitoring and remediation to that, as well as, and then you can get a little bit more sophisticated with questionnaires and, vendors for, let's say, a company like Qantas, they can have literally thousands of vendors, right? But not all of them are maybe critical. Obviously, this one was probably critical because they had information on 6 million customers, but kind of tiering that kind of third-party vendor, right? The first is critical. Second one is important, but you want to do a certain level, and then the rest are kind of you just want to monitor. So they should get the most scrutiny and the most services, and then so on and so on, all the way to the bottom where you just keep track on it on a regular basis.
And how do you think people go about balancing that kind of exercise of identifying criticality? Because I've seen it done where it's like, okay, all right, whatever, all our stuff is in AWS, so AWS is the most critical thing, and we'll put all our focus on them. But then you could also have a smaller vendor that's only an organization of 2 or 3 people that's doing your pen testing or something like that, and
Yeah,
they've actually got quite a fair amount of access, or a consultant that's brought on
yeah.
to do a particular activity. What are your thoughts on how you balance that to make sure that the really important stuff or the really important partners rise to the surface with your third-party monitoring?
So I think, like I said, I think at the beginning of an engagement, it's really critical for BlueVoyant and the client to kind of sit down and go through all the vendors and go through the criteria of what's really important. Connectivity is really important. If they're connected directly into your system, that would probably put it in the most important one. If they're holding
Mm.
customer information, that would be fairly important as well. So we look at kind of those factors to determine who's really critical, and selection of those critical vendors, I think, is key at the beginning of an engagement. That'll really kind of work to the success of the engagement and reducing risk for the company.
And how much do you think we need to sort of be micromanaging our partners as well? You mentioned there, like, do they have this connectivity? But I guess you also need to be, do they have connectivity into our systems, or do they have access to customer data? Do you need to sort of also be questioning, do they need the level of access that they have to do their job, like principles of least privilege? And do you then also sort of need to interrogate down to the level of, what kind of controls do they have on their endpoint? Are they satisfactorily using MFA and all that kind of stuff?
Again, I think it's different levels. I think if you're most critical, you have to be a little bit more cognizant of what they're doing. That's where the questionnaire really comes in. You mentioned the questionnaire. So if they're really critical and they pose a large risk to your organization, you should be a little bit more detailed in the questions that you ask them. The other tiers, you can go a little bit less, but I think those most critical vendors, you really want to have an understanding of what they're doing on the cybersecurity side. And one of the things that we're doing now is bringing others into the conversation, not just the CIO or CISO shops. So we're bringing business operations, legal, procurement into it, because they're usually the ones that have a relationship with vendors, right? I think, CISO and CIO shops usually have the tech vendors, but if it's a normal procurement kind of relationship, those vendors, CISOs and CIOs, usually don't have a relationship. So, well, more and more we're bringing in more of the business side into the conversation about third-party vendors, because there may be critical vendors out there, and it may not even be a cyber risk. If a critical vendor that's only providing you with materials, but if they go down, if they pose a risk to your entity, that can be also a risk factor for the organization itself, not just on cybersecurity. So, a critical vendor, they get attacks, they have a cyber attack or a ransomware attack, and they're completely taken down, but they provide critical parts to your organization or critical services. It can actually delay or affect you adversely as well. So those are the conversations we're having. We're actually talking to the business side a lot more
Mm.
these days.
Yeah, William, I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I think that's music to a CISO's ears, that more people sort of need to be involved in the conversation, and the process of managing third-party risk actually starts much further downstream than the CISO. The CISO and the security team and the risk teams are maybe setting the frameworks and the guardrails, but it's the procurement people and the business partners and the key stakeholders in bringing the third parties on that actually need to be taking these risks seriously and running through these risk assessments and setting up the guardrails and the controls for how they're going to manage their third parties. How would you think that, if your understanding of Australian businesses, how would you rate Australia's maturity in this space, and what are some of the other opportunities that you can see for Australian businesses that maybe we haven't discussed yet?
I think the cybersecurity market and awareness in Australia is pretty advanced. It's comparable to the US and Europe. So as I have conversations throughout Asia, it's a very, very mature market in Australia, and the understanding of cybersecurity and the risks and how to mitigate them it's very advanced. So I would put Australia up there with any other country as far as that is concerned. I think third party risk is one where it's not just Australia, it's Europe and the US are still kind of just discovering and trying to figure out kind of what they do, have more of more comprehensive third-party risk management program. So again, talking to other stakeholders within the organization or even outside the organization, I think that's important. So I think the real kind of the frontier as far as cybersecurity goes now is that third-party risk management. And just recently, a very large company that we work with in Australia, one of the largest, we got the legal business operations procurement side together with our general counsel to talk about exactly this third-party risk and how, and the legal side cares about, hey, can we be intrusive to our third-party vendors? How intrusive can we be? And you mentioned that briefly, like how intrusive can you be? Well, a lot of, what we do is we actually just scan the same way a cyber actor would. So it's all outside facing and it's only what we can see from internet traffic, and we can tell a lot from that. So that's what our general counsel explained to their legal and saying, hey, this doesn't break any laws. This doesn't break any legal contracts or anything like that, because we're doing the exact same thing that a cyber actor would do as well. So I think that third-party risk is becoming more important. That's really something that I think that Australian companies, as well as European and American, should focus on going forward.
I love that example of, well, if we can see it, the bad guys can see it too. And I think that probably is a really interesting lens for people to apply to it, because I've seen people in this space focus on the most, I don't want to say like, there's no sort of small vulnerabilities, but like a fairly minute thing on a fairly inconsequential partner, whether it be a particular deficiency in a control or whatever it may be, right? Like it's hard to say whether it's bad or good, but is it the be all and end all? Is this the thing that an attacker is going to be able to easily identify as the weak link for your organization because it's a third party that has access to whatever, right? So I love that. Yeah, the bad guys can see it, so can we. Now, we've talked a lot about what people do wrong, and you've shared a couple of best practices. Have you got an example of an organization that has handled a third-party breach particularly well, whether it's someone you've dealt with directly or you've just seen in the media, and what others could learn from that?
I like to think cybersecurity and preventing attacks or cyber defense is more like counterterrorism, right? You never really know what you stop. It's never in the news, all the attacks that you stop. So I think there are examples, even in Australia, of companies that do third-party risk right, or in my opinion, very well. And they're usually the ones who have a more comprehensive third-party program, which brings in all stakeholders like I talked about. There is one example that I think of, one of the larger companies in Australia that has a very, very robust third-party program, and they bring in other parties into the conversation. And I see that more and more interest in bringing in kind of non-CISO, non-CIO side into the conversations in other Australian companies as well. There are other companies throughout Asia that I see doing well. In the US, there's, a lot of the Fortune 500 companies are kind of waking up to this and building more robust third-party kind of programs as well. So I see good examples in Australia.
It's an interesting point that you kind of make there around you don't know what you've stopped. I've certainly had examples in my career where we've drilled down on an alert that we've seen or a report that we've got from a user, and we've gone, do you know what? MFA saved us from something really, really dangerous there, or the app whitelisting that we spent months working on actually just saved us from something really, really dangerous there, or whatever it might be. It's almost like, good and bad feedback from a customer. A customer will tell many people if something's gone wrong, but you'll rarely hear about a good experience. So you'll rarely hear about a successfully blocked attack as opposed to a successful attack. Or as an old CFO of mine used to like to say, Dave and his team have to win millions of times a day, whereas the bad guys only have to win once.
We say the same thing in counterterrorism.
yeah, exactly. It's very true.
We have to be right every time. They only have to be right once. So, I mean, no specific examples, but there are instances I could think of where even in Australia, companies have switched out the third-party vendor because of their cybersecurity or their lack of kind of cyber defense side. So I see that as a success where, they reduce the risk by finding an alternate vendor because that one vendor could not get up to speed on cyber defense fast enough. So, and that's reducing risk.
Yeah. And I know I've had conversations with people before where it seems like it's too hard to get rid of that vendor because they're so entrenched, and it's sort of like, well, it'll also be a really, really bad day at the office if we get breached because of that vendor too. So yeah, don't be afraid to put the hard word on when you have to, I think is the moral of that story. Now, William, this has been a really, really fascinating conversation, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But I guess if you could wrap us up with what is the one piece of advice that you would give to an Australian CEO or the executive board of an Australian company today about third-party cybersecurity risk, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think it's making third-party risk management a part of your cyber defense as well as your risk management within a company. Because as we talked about, for the past half hour, that is a area where it can create a large risk for a company. So it has to be in the conversation. I think too long, a lot of companies have thought about third-party risk if they have as a compliance measure, right? They have to comply with some kind of regulation or some kind of policy. But I think it needs to be as high up there as internal cyber defense, because it's as risky as, opening yourself to cyber attacks.
So, listeners, this has been William O providing some fascinating insights into third-party cybersecurity risk. I know a lot of our audience out there are chief information security officers or cybersecurity professionals like me. I'd recommend that you pass this episode on to your CIO, your CTO, your CEO, your people who do your supply chain management, and use it as a way to start that conversation, especially if you're sitting there thinking, I'm vulnerable here and I know that we're not doing enough. Hearing from someone with a fabulous intelligence background like William could be a really, really good way to trigger that conversation off in a human way that people will understand and relate to. So, William, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for sharing your voice with us.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sonar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an AISA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An AISA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at aisa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.